Hello and welcome to my presentation about the Copyright Act. Before I start, I do want to say that this is not intended as legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a high school teacher. This is intended for students doing VCE's software development course, and so keep that in mind. Do not take anything I say as being for sure true. Go talk to a lawyer about that if you're in a situation where it matters. So first of all, what do we mean by copyright? At the heart of copyright is this idea that if you create something, then you get to control it. You get to say who uses it, how you use it, and it can be bought and sold by like any other piece of property. So as I said there, you can talk about how it's used or how it is shared or copied. I didn't mention it here, but you can also buy and sell copyright. So here I'm asking everybody to say, what do we already know about copyright? So when is copyright created? So if you're watching this, is it when it's registered with the Australian government, automatically when it's created, automatically when the idea for the item is created, or when it is published with the copyright symbol? So I'll get you to have a think about which one of those is true. And later in the presentation we'll be going back through those and I'll be telling you, although hopefully you'll have learned along the way. So, second question is, can you use a copyrighted image if you credit the creator? Yes, if the image is on the internet. 2, only with their permission. Yes, provided you are not making money from the image. So, which one of those do you think that is? If you've got a pen and paper, you might want to write down what your answer is so that you can check it when we come back to it. This statement, you can use up to 10% of a copyrighted song in a video that you make without permission. Is that true or is that false? And the final what do we know question. Who does an image created using generative artificial intelligence usually belong to? Is it that it belongs to no one? It's automatically in the public domain. Public domain means that anybody can use it. It really doesn't have an owner. Is it 2, the person who wrote the prompt, but only if they're using a paid service? Or is it just the person who wrote the prompt regardless of what service they're using? Or is it the company that owns the generative AI tool? I think that some of you will be surprised by the answer to this. So, now that we've had a little bit of a dabble in what we know, let's have a look at learning some stuff. So, the Copyright Act is an act of the Australian Parliament from 1968, and it protects written works, so, you know, books, documents, even boring things like policy procedures, instruction manuals, you name it. Music and their lyrics, both of them are protected independently. You will notice that there are lots of lyrics published on the internet, but they are in fact in breach of copyright. The owner of the copyright actually, you need their permission to legally publish it, which is where you actually often see inside record covers, if you have any records or CD covers, that they'll publish it and they'll actually acknowledge who the copyright owner is, because people often sell their catalogues to other companies. Artworks and photos. One of the things that people actually get often confused about, in Australia at least, is if you were to take a photo of me, you are actually the copyright holder, and I, although I'm the subject of the photo, I have no ownership claim on that. There are a couple of countries in the world where they have laws that are different to that, but mostly it's what I've just described, and I'm aware that some of you will be thinking, that's not true, he's wrong. Go and look it up. It is true. Films and videos are copyrighted, and software and games are regarded as literary works, and they are protected as well. A play is copyright, and also a dance. I suspect it's a little bit harder to prove that somebody stole your dance, but a dance is copyrighted. If you come up with particular choreography, that belongs to you. So let's have a look at what the key principles are of copyright law in Australia. The first one is that protection is automatic upon creation. When I made this presentation, actually I was going to say it belongs to me, but that's actually a little bit complicated. It doesn't, but I'll come back to that. If I were to draw a picture here and hold it up for you, I would have created copyright as I drew that picture. There's no formal registration required for your copyright. You will see firms on the internet that will give you official copyright protection. It's no such thing. They're selling you something you already own. They might put it on file and they might timestamp it so you can say, yes, I lodged it with them. And if somebody comes back and says they invented it first, maybe that's going to be useful to you, but you don't have to register copyright. In fact, there is nowhere to formally register copyright. But as I said, there are those firms that will sell you something you already own. It covers works, original works with minimal creativity. So just because I point a camera at my desk and take a photo, even though there is no real creativity in that, it is still covered by copyright. If I write an absolutely pointless song lyric, it is covered. I don't have to record the song or anything. Now, this is probably an interesting point. It protects the expression of the ideas, not the idea themselves. So, if I were to write a story about a wombat called Kevin who goes to the top of the hill and sees a shooting star, the words that I use to tell that story are copyright. The idea of a penguin going to the top of the hill and seeing a shooting star is not copyright. There are other areas of the law that might get your ownership of that, notably trademarks, but trademarks are not part of the study design. So if I write a Hangman program, the code that I wrote, the expression of that idea, the design choices that I make, they are what's protected by copyright, not the idea of a Hangman game. As I said, there are other areas of law at play there, but it's about, that song lyric about having your heart broken, not about the idea of having your heart broken. So how long does copyright last? It's worth making a comment here that copyright is a reasonably common phenomenon. Really wasn't a thing 3 centuries ago. So it lasts for the lifetime of the creator. So every song that I write belongs to me until the day that I die, plus 70 years after the creator's death. Now, if I'm creating it for a corporation, then it's 70 years from the first publication. So that brings us back to this presentation. I'm making this presentation in my capacity as a teacher at Geelong High School. Because it's a work for hire, they would own it. So when I publish it, which I'm doing right now, the clock starts. They own it for 70 years from here forward, and after that, it becomes public domain. So if you're in class, you'd be finding 3 famous works that are now in the public domain. I have to say, Hollywood loves things that's in the public domain because they've got a lot of history and people know about them. Frankenstein leaps to mind, Romeo and Juliet. I think A Christmas Carol is out of copyright. I think Peter Pan might have recently come out of copyright because you can do whatever you want with them without paying anybody a cent. They're no longer protected. You can use the exact words. So, the creator always owns it, is the question. Well, kind of. So in the first instance, the person who created the item owns it. That's what's generally true. However, if I'm an employee, such as I am of Geelong High School, then the owner owns the copyright. I don't have to have been directly instructed to make this presentation. I can't say, but nobody asked me to make it. I made it on my own time. I made it with my own computer, and all of this is true. But I'm still making it as an employee of Geelong High School, and it doesn't matter that I wasn't directly commissioned to do it. I am making it in my capacity of my job, and therefore it belongs to my employer, and will for 70 years after it's published. Okay, let's keep going. So, if I'm a contractor, now a contractor would be somebody, you don't see them much in education, but they're quite common in the corporate world. So they come in and do a job for you within your organisation. And so if I were, say, a contractor and I was creating this for another school that I actually wasn't an employee of, they just said, Mr. O'Mara, we want you to come in and make this presentation for us, I might retain rights of it unless part of the deal was, we want to buy the copyright of this. I imagine most people, if they were commissioning me to make a presentation, would probably want to retain the copyright of it, but that would actually have to be spelt out in the contract. And finally, if it's a commissioned work, which in this example is pretty simple, is pretty straightforward. If I'm taking wedding photos, for instance, I suspect there are different contracts, but I would probably be paying for the copyright of those photos. I don't want to have to go back and ask permission to publish my own wedding photos. What I'm paying for usually involves the copyright. So, I've said, what questions did you ask to find out who owns the copyright for this presentation? I think probably you'd want to know, you might ask things like, when did you make it? Like, did you make it during school hours? Did you make it on school equipment? These seem like relevant questions, but in actual fact, the sort of key question is, in what capacity did I make it? Well, I made this presentation to use with my Year 12 and Year 11 classes. I made it as an employee of Geelong High. And in that capacity, I am an employee, and typically the employer owns the copyright. I have heard of schools, I don't think this is very common, but I have heard of schools where the stuff that you make is actually on-sold by the school to other parties. You know, that they have IP deals where people own the content that are created. I think that's really unusual. I don't think that's common, but I have heard of it. So there's this rule. You own it, you control it, but if you strictly enforce this rule, you would actually strangle the use of culture. You couldn't review a movie with a clip from it. You couldn't use a poster to talk about a movie. You couldn't use a still from it. You couldn't use a poem in school. And you know, it's you couldn't read a book out loud to students. So there are exceptions where it says, hey, the rules don't apply to you. And then there's this thing called fair use, which means, yeah, the rules apply to you, but if you use it this way, that's fair. So, what are they? For research and study. So, if I'm reading, I don't know, if we're studying Shakespeare, I might copy part of it to share with the class. We might do the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. Likewise, if I'm writing a paper about something, I can copy small amounts of copyrighted text to include in my paper. So people often cite other people's works in academic papers. So, you know, Omara 2025 said that, and they will put my exact words in. That's covered as fair use for study. For criticism and review, that I can go through and say, here's a clip from the latest Indiana Jones film, and I think it's good, bad, or the other. Excuse me for just a tick. Now, it's worth remembering that these things have limitations. They're not just blanket exemptions. So I can't just show an entire film on the internet and then I pop in at the end and say, I don't think this is a good film, and say, well, that's fair use because I was reviewing it. It actually has to be a good faith review that isn't removing that person's right to control that film. So I'm not essentially screening the film under the guise of I'm reviewing it. So there is more detail in that. I am not sure about those videos that you see on YouTube where people will watch a whole TV show and react to it. I suspect that falls under criticism and review. But I think that if you were to just sit there and stare at it, there would be a point at which you're probably not acting in the spirit of that exemption. But again, that'd be up to the lawyers. Okay, let's jump back in. Reporting the news. Yeah, they can use footage. They don't have to ask you permission. Sometimes they do. So like people actually will sell footage to news organisations if they've captured something really good on their phone. But they can they can use small amounts of stuff to report the news for educational purposes. So this is actually something that I didn't know. I thought that if I were to take an image and use it, say, in this presentation, or if you were to use it in your school presentation, then we were technically in breach of copyright. It turns out you can actually use them for educational purposes. You can't put it in a commercial product. You can't just put it out on the internet. It actually has to be within a school's closed environment. So it's not a loophole. So for instance, I haven't put copyrighted material into the wiki page about this. This is actually probably a good time for me to mention this. Here is the wiki page. Now, this content is largely created by AI. And so I'm coming to this later, but I actually don't own it. It's pretty much gone straight into the public domain. So I don't own it, and in fact Geelong High School can't own it because nobody can own it, because that's where it came from. But if it did have copyright material in it, then I shouldn't just be slapping it up on the internet. Again, you know, if it came to it, it would be interesting to see what a judge said. Now, in terms of backing up a game, let's say you've got a game on physical media, you know, a DVD or a CD, and you want to back it up in case something happens to the original copy. You do have a limited right to do that. I don't think it's actually stated in the Copyright Act. You do have a limited right, but you can't get around any copy protection. So if somebody's put copy protection on it, then you can't get around that copy protection to make a backup of the game. So you only have a limited right to back up the game. You can't share that backup with anybody. It's not permission to, you know, make multiple copies of it. You can just make a copy B in case something happens to copy A. But in most instances, you actually can't do it because of copy protection. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. Format shifting for music, this has actually changed over the years. I can get my vinyl records and I can record them onto cassette or onto CD or onto MP3s, and likewise I can burn my MP3s onto CDs and so forth. I can only sort of use them within my household. I can't share them with other people. I can't say, hey, I burnt you a copy of this. Now, I'm aware that people do this all the time. They share files and whatnot, although I think it's probably less common in this age of streaming. But it is again a limited exemption, or exception, sorry. It's not just you can make as many copies as you want. You can shift it into another format that you use, but it's really for you, and I think you can also be for your family, and I think for that, or your household. So, you know, somebody else in the house can put on that CD. It's not quite that ridiculous. So, I talked about this just a minute ago. Who owns material that is created by AI? Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this changes in the future, but this is the state of the law at the moment. Generally speaking, AI images generally automatically go into the public domain. They become ownerless straight away. The Australian Copyright Council suggests that for a work to be copyrightable, it has to have original human intellectual effort. So I wrote the prompt for that image on the side there, and I wrote robot painting portrait of person. I think we would claim, you'd say there's a little bit of effort in there. The work must demonstrate creative selection or arrangement. I think, again, this would be something for a court to decide on. I don't think this work would pass. I think this would be, you know, not my work. I didn't put in enough effort. I didn't make enough decisions. And it says mere mechanical reproduction or AI generation is insufficient. So, you know, copying and pasting or just saying, hey, make this for me. I certainly think that if I could probably say, you know what, when it comes to the wiki itself, even though most of the content is AI, so this page here wouldn't be protected, but possibly, and again, you'd need a judge and jury to decide on this, possibly the entire work, because I've come up with the structure and I've created the links and I've decided what content to include, that the entire work I might own some or all of that work. So that's where we're at with material created by AI at the moment. So I've said here, what would you need to know about this image to decide who owns it? Well, I think you'd probably need to know how much effort I put into creating it. You know, how many decisions did I make? Did it give me 3 images and I said, okay, I'd like a mixture of image 2 and 3. Do I go in and say, oh, I'd like it to be a, you know, young lady in a kind of 19th century setting? I don't know why they're standing on a cog there. You know, how much was I actually driving, or how much of this process was self-driven? I think would be the question. I'm trying to think of where you would care, but let's say that I was selling this on a t-shirt and it became unexpectedly popular, and then other people started selling the t-shirts with this image on them. If I wanted to actually hit them with a complaint about copyright, I suspect that they could push back. In fact, I strongly suspect that they could push back and say, you never owned this in the first place. You know, I've got as much right to it as you have. Now, I'm not sure if that's moral or not. I think there's a lot of morality questions about AI, but that's the state of the law at the moment. This isn't on the study design, but I want to share it with you anyway. There's this thing called Creative Commons. Creative Commons comes in 7 flavours. CC BY just means, yeah, anybody can use this thing that I own, but you've got to attribute me as the author of it. Lots of places people like a link back to your website or where you got it and so forth, but yeah, anybody can use it. You've just got to say it came from me. This second one, CC by SA, is you've got to attribute me, and you've got to share what you made when you adapted that image. That's got to be open to other people. You can't just then make changes to it and then you own it. Whereas with that first one, you could say, you know, based on an image by Mr. O'Mara, and you could change it and you would own the copyright to that. This one here is asking you to basically say, I'm going to pay it forward. This says attribution required, no derivatives allowed. So you can't change it at all. You can use it, but you can't make any changes to it. This one, attribution required, but for non-commercial use only. So that one's quite good for education. And you know, if you're making games and stuff, but not if you are selling them. If you wanted to sell it, you would actually need CC BY up here. You'd actually need that to be the license on it. This one, non-commercial and share alike. You need to be making something that you are happy to have other people share. And non-commercial, no derivatives. You can't make money, you can't have derivatives of it. And finally, this last one says, I waive all copyright to the extent that I can. You know, I don't care. Let the world have it. Do whatever you want with it. You don't have to attribute me. You can just have it. Now, these things sit on top of existing copyright law. So when we go into the copyright here and we look at the Copyright Act, and then we click through to the page, it's a little bit slow to load here. So if you can hear that noise in the background, that's just the lawnmower. Creative Commons. Creative Commons actually sits on top of it. It's a condition, it's a way of saying ahead of time, I give you permission to use this work. The Copyright Act still applies. You still need permission, but they're giving you permission ahead of time. And by the type of license here, they're saying this is the sort of permission that I'm giving you. If they act in breach of that, you can still take recourse through the Act. You are still the owner of it, and you're still allowed to do it. I, however, am not the owner of this, so I actually couldn't put it on Creative Commons because I don't own it. Geelong High owns it. Okay, I've asked you to write a hypothetical question about using one of these licenses. So, what do we know? Well, let's go back to the questions we started with. When is copyright created? Well, it's created automatically when the item is created. So if you wrote down 2, you had that right. Next up, can you use a copyrighted image if you credit the creator? No, only with their permission. Now, Creative Commons would count as with their permission because that's what Creative Commons is. It's giving people permission, even though you haven't met them yet, to reuse it. No, just being on the internet is not doesn't mean that the image is free. I am aware that people treat it that way, but it's not how the law views it, and you can get in trouble for it. So the answer to that one is 2. And lots of people, I've had $1 for every student who told me this. Oh, I'm not making any money from it. The Act doesn't care about that. It's 2. So you can use up to 10% of a copyrighted song in a video that you make without permission. Another really common misconception. It is actually false. You can make up to 10% in cases such as if you're doing it for study, if you're doing it for education and so forth. So I can copy a chapter out of a book to share with my class, but what I can't do is just holus bolus share it with the world. I can't just go, oh, okay, I'm going to share chapter 1 of the book on my website, and you get to share chapter 2, and you get to share chapter 3. It's actually got to be within the context of educational use. It's not just a blanket, oh yeah, you can take 10% of something. People do get they get copyright claims. So if I make a video and I have 10% of a song in it, the person can put a copyright claim on it, and what normally happens is that they get the entire ownership of it. So I'm in fact giving away my share of it. If I ask for permission, I could negotiate my share, but unfortunately the copyright holders, have a better relationship with people like YouTube than you and I do, and they'll get the entire ownership of your video in terms of it being monetized and so forth, because you've breached copyright. Effectively, you're forfeiting it by your copyright breach. So, next one. Who does an image created using generative artificial intelligence usually belong to? It's number 1. It's no one. This little picture of the penguin here, no one owns that. No one else will probably ever use it, but I don't own it. So, finally, it is an act of the Australian Parliament. So, they passed that. So, question for you. Am I in breach of the Act by using this image of Parliament House in this presentation? The answer is no, because I am protected by fair use because I'm using it for an educational purpose. The specifics of that say where you can attribute where you got it from, and I have done that down there. So by virtue of being an educator, I think that I'm not in breach of the Act, although I am putting it out there in public and outside the context of the school and our protected system. So while I think I'd probably be okay, the short version is it's not 100% clear. Like all of these things, there's a bit of context. So I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in some other video.